Hello, my name is Miguel Morales.
My name is Juan Castro,
Welcome to Power Your Story Season 5.
a podcast from Raygram Training Center High School in Chicago.
My name is Miles. This is our team is making a podcast.
Hello, my name is Gennaro Jackson from Power Your Story Podcast. In this episode, Christobel, Zamire, and Keyanna interviewed Chicago-based storyteller Ada Cheng. Before the COVID pandemic, we were so lucky to have Ada in the house for our interview and a workshop where she helped us tell stories from our lives. One thing we learned is what to do if you lack the courage to do something and need to find the determination in yourself. Ada's motto is make your life the best story you tell. Ada hosts live storytelling events like Pour One Out and Talk Stories. During the pandemic, these events are virtual. You can learn more at renegadeadacheng.com. Links will be in the show notes for this episode at poweryourstorypodcast.com.
Hi, this is Keyanna with Power Your Story. I am here with Zamire and Christobel. We are interviewing a professional storyteller, Ada Cheng. Welcome, Ada, to Power Your Story.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Thank you for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Ada Cheng, and I'm a professor turned storyteller and performing artist. I have been in Chicago for about 17 years.
Awesome. Where did you grow up and what brought you to Chicago?
I grew up in Taipei, Taiwan. I was born there, and I was there for 27 years before I moved to the United States. I came to the United States as a graduate student. I was in Eugene, Oregon first for my master's degree, and I went to UT Austin, University of Texas, Austin for my PhD. And the reason I came to Chicago was to start a teaching position at DePaul University. So I taught at DePaul for 15 years.
Thank you.
What inspired me to do storytelling? When I was teaching at the university, I was already doing storytelling in the classroom. When I was teaching sociology subjects, so gender, sexuality, race, immigration, all kinds of subjects, I would talk about my personal experiences. And at some point at the end of my teaching, I realized that I wanted to reach people's hearts, right? I saw students' mind were changing. Sure, I was changing their mind. I made them think. But I realized that if I want people to change the world, if I want people to take actions, I really want to touch their heart. I want to not just make them think, but I also want to make them feel. And I decided that I also want to reach a larger audience. And that's how I started doing storytelling. That I find storytelling is a much more effective way if I want to touch people emotionally, not just make them think. Oh, gosh. So 2015 was very much the year where I felt I had to change my career. So I changed my career at the age of 51. So when I decided to leave the university to pursue storytelling and theater performance, my friends, my colleagues thought I was going nuts, thought you don't quit your job to pursue your passion when you're in your 50s. So yeah, I started late, very late in my 50s. And what I want to tell people is it's never too late to pursue your dream. Where do I perform? I started out performing at storytelling open mics, and there are a lot of storytelling shows in Chicago. So for the past 2-3 years, I've been telling stories in different storytelling shows in Chicago. I also have been performing in different cities, for example, New York, Asheville, Kansas City, Atlanta, and San Francisco. So I perform everywhere, not just in Chicago, but also different cities in the United States.
That's cool. Why did you start podcasts? And what made you come up with the title and topic am I man enough?
Very good. Podcasting is something new. I have to admit that all these microphone and headsets, all this very fancy for me. I'm not a technical person. But when I started the show, Am I Man Enough, I also realized that a lot of people are not able to get to the show physically. I will be hosting shows at different bookstores, different theaters, but there are times people just can't get to it. But I do want people to listen to the stories, and what better way than to say podcast. Am I Man Enough is very much about, I taught masculinity at a university. And in our society, we have this pressure that we tell boys and men that you need to be masculine enough, you need to act like a boy. And so boys and men in our society have a lot of pressure that they have to assume certain characteristics. They have to be strong, they have to be independent, they cannot be vulnerable. And so the reason that I create that title is Am I Man Enough is to show how people in our society, particularly men, have to struggle with putting up a facade of being a man. But there's also negative impact, not just on men themselves, but also on people around them. So I use that as a way to ask ourselves when we tell people to say to themselves, am I man enough? We have to ask ourselves, what's the impact on them and on everyone surrounding them?
That's a very good thing.
Thank you.
Do you do your own editing or do you have a team?
I have to, I'm not good with the technology. I'm terrible. I'm that generation where technology is alienating. But I don't want to wait until I learn everything. So I decided to have somebody professional to do the editing for me before I can master the skills myself. And sometimes it's better for just have professionals to take care of the technical part, and I can focus on developing concepts. I can focus on curating and securing tellers, and I don't have to worry about the editing, all these technical aspects. And I wouldn't be good at it, right? It's about I want to do something, I'm good at it, and there are people who are good with editing, the technical stuff. It's better for them to do that.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is it someone or some people?
Some people. So I have different people, a company. They're also young entrepreneurs and they're developing their own company. So they want to work with people who are doing storytelling shows that they're interested in the topic. And so I usually have members, employees from the company to come to the show to tape, very similar to what we're doing right now, except you have your teacher to tape our conversation. I have somebody come to the show and now we have podcast. We also have YouTube videos. So they would tape the whole thing, video and audio both. And then after they're done with recording, they go back, then edit the audio part and to create it for podcast. And then they edit the videos for YouTube. So for people who want to listen, they can listen to a podcast. For people who want to look at the videos, they can go to YouTube.
Okay, so how did you come up with that story tale?
My own stories. So the stories, personal stories, these are all my personal experiences. So what I have done when I started telling story, I have to say this, when I first started, stories come easy. So it's easy for me to think about, okay, I can tell stories about my students, story about my teaching, stories about my parents, story about my brother, or story about my childhood. And when it's difficult, what I have also done is to brainstorm, right? So I will create a list for myself. I would say, write down the word elementary school, and then I will put in keywords. What are the events in elementary school? And I will put in keywords. All right, playground, fights, teacher, right? And then in middle school, I will put in what are the major events in middle school. I will put in teacher, body change, school, fights with parents, for example, I don't know, phone calls, right? I'll put in High school, what other keywords? So I would create lists from each stage of my life. And that's how I come up with stories. It's really to go back to my life and experiences and to think about what happened to me and what experiences I can get so I can tell it and present it to the audience.
Where do you get your ideas?
Where did I get my idea? I use one I call life stage excavation, meaning go back to each life stage, right? Middle school, high school, college, young adulthood, middle age, go back to each stage and really think about what experiences I can have, right? That's what I do. The other thing is I will give myself a command, feeling word, the same sad. And I will sit there, I think to myself, sad. And I sit there with my feeling. And I let my feeling guide me to think about what stories I can tell. So I would sit with my feeling sadness for a while. And then stories will come up. Are there stories about sadness I can tell? Or I would give myself a command, angry. What stories can I tell about being angry? Or I would think about happy, right? I would sit with that feeling for a while and I would think to myself, the stories will come up. There are stories about happiness. Or the other way I might say, I would give myself a command, chair. Okay, what story can I tell about chair? Classroom. What story can I tell about classroom? So I use different ways to trigger my brain and creativity to come up with stories.
How did you put the stories together with details?
That's actually, when I first started telling stories, it didn't come easy for me. Details are not easy because when I was an academic, I think more conceptually, it's more about concepts. So I have to tell myself, I have to be very intentional and deliberate about, all right, if I'm going to describe something, let's say if I'm going to describe this classroom, I will ask myself, where is the classroom? Where? When did this happen? Right? What happened? Right? What's the room like? What did I see? What did I hear? What did I smell? What did people talk about? Right? So I ask all these questions about where, who, when, what, right? All these, we say the journalism question. Very similar to what you're asking, the question you're asking. These will help me think about what are the details. And then I'll go into more about senses. What do we hear? What do we see? What do we smell? What do we touch? How do we touch it? What does it feel like, right? So we can depend on our senses to find a way to integrate details as well. So there are different ways where we can pay attention to the details in our surroundings.
That's kind of like the stuff we learn in second grade.
I'm telling you, things we learn in kindergarten, in elementary school, they're still important in adulthood, right? It's the same in life. It's the same lesson over and over again, right? You learn the same thing. Absolutely.
How do you keep working on your story if you get bored or lazy?
That's a very good question. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you get bored or lazy?
Of course.
On what things do you get bored or lazy?
I had asked this question because I once started a story writing going like have 4 pages of it.
And then you get bored.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything in your life that you never get bored or you get lazy?
Of course.
Okay, what is it?
Go shopping, hang out with my friends.
All right, very good. Why is that you don't get bored with going shopping or spending time with?
Because it's fun. It's exciting. And it's something I would want to do.
It's your passion, right?
Yeah.
Going shopping, spending time with your friends. So if something is your passion, you normally don't get bored.
Right.
Right? So for me, then the question is, do I get bored and lazy? Sure. But because I love this so much, so I don't necessarily get bored or lazy. So now here's a tricky thing. If you really want to accomplish this, how do you convince yourself that this is your passion, right?
By having a dream.
Exactly. So think about this. When we get bored and lazy, sometimes it's because something is not that important to us, or we don't feel the passion, right? It's not our dream. It's less important. How do we turn that around? How do we make ourselves interested in it again?
Make something exciting.
Exactly. So we trick our brain. We prioritize, we rethink. How can we make this thing a passion for us? How can we make the thing interesting to us so we can continue to be interested, so we don't get bored? Does it make sense?
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah. So think about it. There are things that you don't feel bored. There are things you never get lazy because you go shopping. That's your passion, right? You spend time with your friends. You love it. Then the thing is, when you feel that you're not interested in something, find a way to convince yourself. Make that thing interesting to yourself. Find your passion, right? Redefine it. Make it interesting. Convince yourself, redefine it. It's all about redefining that thing. Yeah?
Thank you. How do you know people are going to be interested in hearing your story?
Very good. Can I ask you a question? Sure. Is it important for other people to be interested in your story?
It is, but it isn't. As long as you know and it's interesting to you and something that you want people to hear.
Exactly. Now, to answer your question, is it important that people find my story interesting? Sure, only to a certain extent. What's more important is that I feel it is important to tell my story, right? So I'll give you an example. I teach storytelling workshops. The first question that students would ask me is, I don't know if my stories are important to share. And I will tell them, it doesn't matter what I think. But if you don't convince yourself, you're not going to convince anybody. The first thing is that you have to believe that your stories are important, that your stories are necessary to share, that they are worthy of sharing. And you will have to believe that, right? And then, once you believe that, then you can convince your audience. And the truth is, it doesn't matter. The most important part is that it has to matter to you first, right? And I'm good with only one person there because I believe as long as I can reach that one person in the audience, that's good enough for me, right? It's about deep connection. I don't need to have 100 audience members, right? I don't need to have 100 audience members with shallow relationships. But if my story resonates that one person in the audience, and that one person says, wow, this is so important, this relates to this change, that's the important part. So my goal is always, I just need that one person. But then, whether that person exists or not, that's another issue. And that's okay with me too.
That relates to when you're in a store and you buy something from the store and then you like, do you like this? And then another person say, I like it. I don't like it. It's not all that cute to me. As long as you like it.
Yes?
Then, yeah. So
the point is, you need to convince yourself. You need to believe in yourself. Then you can convince your audience members. Then you can educate your audience members, right? And the thing also, you don't want to be just being validated by other people. You need to be validated by yourself. And that has to come from you, right?
what makes an interesting story?
Good question. And that's oftentimes students would say, I'm worried that my stories might be boring. Sure, There are techniques we can make our stories interesting. Details. You take people on the journey up and down. You follow some dramatic arc, right? You have the dramatic climax and then you follow certain storyline. You can make that interesting. But here's the thing that I also believe, that I do not want storytelling simply for entertainment. It's more important that people feel, not just they feel, oh, entertained. I would tell storytellers, tell the stories that work for you. Tell your story the way that it serves the story, right? Don't worry about entertaining people. Don't worry about making it interesting. Sometimes when we try to make things interesting, we end up losing the importance of the story, right? We sometimes end up losing the integrity of our experiences. What I oftentimes say is stay true to your experiences. Make it work for you as a storyteller. Speak the truth of our experiences. If you want to think about entertaining people, that's a different thing. But stay with the truth first.
How do you pay for that story?
Do you mean in terms of how do I get up there and tell that story? I rehearse and practice at home. I write my story first, right? Because I also want to publish. So I write my story and I will memorize it. Not completely, but the gist of the story. And I practice, I rehearse. Part of performing, telling story on stage, why do I rehearse? Is I want to make sure you can get on your nerves, right? On stage, you can get nervous. So I want to make sure that I rehearse, that I prepare myself well enough so I can tell stories on stage.
What do you do when nervous?
What do I do when I feel nervous? I just do what I fear most. That's how I overcome my nerve. This is what I would say. If you're afraid of something, do it. Why? A lot of the fear is all in our head, right? Yeah. It's a fear of failure, of making mistakes, right? And it's all in our head. Nothing has happened yet. But we also know once you do it, once you try it, the first thing I would tell storytellers, don't try to be perfect. Think of getting better each time. If you're pursuing perfection, it's not going to happen. Right? We can pursue professionalism. Because I will tell you, I practice my script 100 times. I still stumble on words. I forget my words. Right? So it's not about professionalism. But I do know I'm better tomorrow. Right? And the day after that, I'm better than tomorrow, right? So the goal is to get better each day. That's one thing. How do you overcome your nerve? Make mistakes. That's okay. It's not life and death, right? We are going to make mistakes no matter what. So I would tell myself, that's okay. I'll make mistakes. I'll make a fool of myself. So what? I'll come back better tomorrow. But I learn from my mistakes, right? So I believe in making mistakes. I believe in simply trying it, doing it, so you know how to work on your nerve, right? You can think your way out of it. If you're afraid of something, do it. Because once you do it, you reduce the nerve. You just keep on doing it until your nerve is completely gone, right? So that's the only way to overcome.
What do you love mostly about your work?
Oh, it's talking to storytellers, curating shows, finding people with good stories to tell, and they tell stories. And I oftentimes have new storytellers, people who have never done storytelling before. And when they come to show and they just do a great job, they perform really the best. And it's really developing talent, finding people with good stories to tell, and sharing their talent and their stories with the world. That's what I love about my work.
What is the most challenging thing about your work?
The most challenging about my work is how to help people convince themselves that their stories are worth sharing. That's one. Sometimes I will tell people, I know your stories. You got stories. I know you got stories, right? But they will say, oh, I don't know if my stories are good enough. I don't know if my stories are interesting. I don't know if I can tell. And so a lot of self-doubt. So the challenging part really is about how do I convince them that your stories are worth sharing? And I can't convince themselves for them. They have to convince themselves. And so that's the challenging part.
Have you ever met someone famous?
Gosh, how famous are we talking about here?
Famous like a superstar, singer, actress.
Oh, no. No. Actually, in terms of Hollywood superstar, no. Doing art is a little bit different. Meeting famous people is not necessarily a goal. The goal, perhaps, is to become famous yourself, right? Because I was thinking about, I have storytelling friends who are famous storyteller. For example, Raymond Christian, who is a teller with Snap Judgment. And he has been going around telling stories in different parts of the country. Snap Judgment is everywhere. But I also have to say this is we simply see him as sort of famous right now, but he has been pitching story for 6 or 7 years without success, right? And so oftentimes we see the glory of the fame, but we don't see the hard work that people put in. That in fact that he struggled for years without anybody responding to his pitches, that he wanted to tell his stories, but nobody wanted those stories. And so now he's all famous. And so people think it's easy. It's not. And I know that he struggled for years, not being able to respond to, nobody wanted to hear his stories. And so this is what I want to say is that if your goal is about fame, it's the wrong route, right? But if you're consistently doing solid work, then perhaps at some point fame will come. And that's not necessarily the major thing that you're pursuing. Sure, fame is great, but it also comes with a price too.
Why start partying?
Why are stories important? One thing, do you feel that you can relate to me better?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you feel that we actually have some sort of intimate relationship there, even though we really don't have a relationship? Yeah? Right? Do you feel that we have some commonalities? Right? That's what storytelling is about. We are from different backgrounds. We're very different. But you didn't just listen to my stories today. You were relating to me with your own stories, your own experiences. I know it's there. That's why we're sinking in our head and our emotion. That's what story is doing. It's about how do we reduce our relationship? How do we increase the closeness between us? How do we increase the intimacy? How do we relate to each other when we're so different? Storytelling, that's a power, right?
Is there anything else you want to share with us today?
Oh, very good. So I can see that all of you have stories to tell, and I hope that I will be able to invite you to my shows to tell at some point. All right? And thank you for inviting me here.
Thank
I
you
really
for being
appreciate
on the
it.
show.
Yeah, thank you.
Power Your Story podcast is produced by students at Rehearsal Training Center High School in Chicago.
With broadcast support from After School Matters in the Creative and Positive Studios.
Our theme music is by Gennaro Jackson, aka DJ Spark.
You can find our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and on the web at poweryourstorypodcast.com.
We are on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as Power Your Story Podcast.
Follow us, subscribe, leave a review, and share our show with a friend.
Thank you for listening. Keep it classy.
Turn up all the way.